Well, hello and welcome to the Babylonian podcast. I am Michael and I'm thrilled that you are here. In this season of the Babylonian podcast, we're exploring all of the New Testament Apocrypha. Well, maybe not in all. Either way, you can find our notes on all the New Testament Apocrypha, what we talk about here on the podcast episode, and even more, either with the link in the show notes below or by going to our website, thebabylonian.com. With that, let's actually look at them, shall we? With scholars, sages, and the scriptures, let's Bible on. Welcome back to Babylonia. Welcome back to the Infancy Gospels. This is our last Infancy Gospel that we are going to be reading from. And in our last Infancy Gospel, we saw probably the latest development in the exaltation of Mary out of the Infancy Gospels that we're going to be looking at, where she's referred to as Lady Mary, and she has these powers. She pretty much uses Jesus as like a token and a device to heal other people, cast out demons, do all these crazy things that Jesus does in the canonical Gospels. In this apocryphal Infancy Gospel, which is called The History of Joseph the Carpenter, we're actually going to look at Joseph. And in fact, we're actually going to be looking at Joseph's death. And here's the other really interesting thing. So I don't know if you know about Eastern Orthodoxy and their whole take on the intermediate state and what happens after you die, but they don't believe in purgatory like Roman Catholics do, and they don't believe, as probably most Protestants do, that they kind of believe that your soul will ultimately end up, as Protestants do. I think that is the same, but they believe in this type of journey that your spirit goes through whenever you die. And there's these whole toll houses, and there's this war between demons and angels surrounding it. So I'm not an authority on all of the Eastern Orthodoxy, but I just knew that there was some resemblance of that. And we're going to be seeing a less developed version of that view of the afterlife, of that soul to the afterlife after it dies, after somebody dies, in this apocryphal Infancy Gospel. So this one is very different. So this text, the history of Joseph the Carpenter, dates to about the 4th to 6th century, and it's supposedly written by the apostles. The province this author claims that it goes to Egypt, and its original language could have been Greek, and there might have been a reference to it in the Galatian Decree.
What's the Galatian Decree?
I gotta be honest, I don't know. The Galatian Decree,
Okay.
I think it was an early text that was listing a bunch of texts, probably canonical and uncanonical, maybe saying the status of whether some of them are heretical or not. I remember that some of them were doing that, but there were some decrees and like the stichiometry of Nicefera or whatever that I had, that we've been mentioning sometimes. That was another one of those. So I think it's just one of those, if that makes sense. Yeah, with that, let's jump in. So this text opens up, and this is a quotation from the text: "In the name of God, of one essence and three persons." Already off to a pretty orthodox beginning, orthodox introduction. And then it claims to tell the history of the death of our father, which is, can you guess who our father is?
Is it going to be talking about Abraham or Joseph? Or
Joseph.
Yahweh? Okay.
Yeah. Oh, that would be pretty.
Our father would make sense with Abraham, but I guess in context of like, this is, the history of Joseph, it's going to be Joseph.
Yeah, it is. It's kind of interesting. I don't know. It's pretty unique in that out of the New Testament Apocrypha in this edition, there's not really that much emphasis on Joseph the Carpenter. When Joseph is in a story, he's like this pious guy who doesn't want to marry Mary just because he doesn't want to, he wants to stay a virgin after already having his children. And he's like this righteous guy, but Joseph is their father in this text, which is interesting. And so it opens up, "In the name of God, of one essence and three persons," claims to tell the death of our father Joseph the Carpenter. And it says, May his blessings and prayers preserve us all.
So you've got some of that little, he's praying in some sense for us, like right now, even though he's probably dead. So interesting.
Yeah, exactly. So you can already see from this opening, it is orthodox in its theology proper, but it also has inserted into it already this belief in these saints, these dead saints interceding for people on earth. So then Jesus is explained to have been giving this story of his father Joseph to his disciples on the Mount of Olives after instructing them on what will happen in the end of days and giving them other ethics. So he's on the Mount of Olives in front of Jerusalem. So this is from the canonical episode, but now he's telling this story, and everything is included in this story. It's as if Jesus is telling this to the apostles. That's how the apostles were able to write this down. So it gives authority to this Apocrypha because now Jesus is the one saying this to his disciples. And so it makes it clear that one of the main points of this Apocrypha is to teach ethical instruction. And at the same time, it makes the apostles the author of this, which right now I'm thinking of it, it's pretty interesting because we've seen a lot of apocryphal material based on or attributed to James or Thomas, and especially Thomas is seen as being, maybe he was a twin of Jesus. So maybe he knew about these things about when Jesus was an infant. But in having Jesus tell this to his disciples, now we can know that the people who wrote this down actually had somewhere that they got it from. And they don't have to give into this heretical tradition of Thomas being a sort of twin of Jesus, if that makes sense. So they're also keeping themselves in a more orthodox way while giving this Apocrypha authority and making it more valid. So it's kind of clever now that I think about it. That didn't really click with me earlier. So it opens up, Jesus is now telling the story, and he explains how Joseph was a descendant of King David, educated and made priest in the temple, and he also knew carpentry well, which is to contrast with, I can't remember, do you remember which apocryphal gospel it was where, I remember talking about this, where Jesus has to make some of Joseph's boards of wood longer and help him with carpentry because it says Joseph was so stupid and didn't know how to do carpentry. Do you remember which one that was?
I want to say it was the Infancy Gospels, Thomas, but I could be wrong.
Okay.
But I would guess it's that one.
Okay. Yeah, it was definitely one part that was based on that. Yeah, but anyways, it's interesting. So he's a good carpenter here. He has 4 sons, Judas, Justus, James, and Simeon. I think that one of his sons is named Joseph, right? In the canonical Gospels?
A little bit different. Yeah.
Okay.
I don't remember what it is. Yeah.
Okay, let me look it up real quick. Let's see. Yes, it's Joseph. So James, Joseph, Judas, and Simon. And then here we have Judas, Justus, James, and Simeon. So I'm guessing that Justus might just be like an alternate version of the name that passed down. Or I was going to say it's just because of the language, but if it's in Greek, then I guess that also technically would have had that. But he also has 2 daughters, Asia and Lydia, but his righteous wife died. So again, making it clear that this is a righteous man. These children come from another wife and not Mary. And he's this educated person in the temple. He's not this poor person. He's an educated person who was brought up in the temple, just like Mary in all the other apocryphal literature. So interesting that he becomes this carpenter and is doing this secular work, being brought up in the temple. But yeah, interesting little additions that it adds to the backstory of Joseph. So anyways, after Joseph married Mary, and it says when she was 14 and brought her to his house, Mary saw James the Less devastated because of the death of Joseph's past wife. So Mary then comforts him and raises him up, and so is called the mother of James because she raised up James. And then Mary stays a virgin even in Joseph's house. So, and then this is also making sure that the reader knows that Mary, the mother of Jesus, is the one who went to see Jesus at his tomb. In Luke 24:10, it says that Mary, the mother of James, went to go see him. So this is an explanation of why Mary is called the mother of James in that passage and not the mother of Jesus, and why it's specifically James. So pretty clever.
They're filling in all the gaps.
Yeah, they have taken into account even like the smallest details. I didn't even remember that passage talking about her being the mother of James, to be honest. I will say though, now that I think about it, this does kind of put a rupture in them choosing to have Jesus say this to the disciples instead of say James say it. Because if James had said this, then, obviously he would have remembered that. But this is before Jesus is born, according to this. So a little continuity error, but I guess he's using his divine knowledge to make sure that the apostles know the backstory of his parents. Anyways, so the cave that Mary gives birth to Jesus in is it's taking from the proto-evangelium of James. It's telling the story of Jesus's birth, and it has the cave that Jesus gives birth to Jesus in being a cave near the tomb of Rachel, the wife of Jacob, where she also died giving birth to Benjamin. So I'm guessing this is like connecting Jesus to the new Jacob. That would be my best guess, or the new son of Jacob, I guess, because this is where Rachel died giving birth to Benjamin. Like this is the fulfillment of Israel. I guess that's the most meaning I can get out of it. I don't know if you have anything else from that.
I got an idea, perhaps. One of the sons of Jacob is Joseph, and the title of this Apocrypha is Joseph. So, or history of Joseph. So maybe it's doing something with that. I don't know. I mean, that might be a little bit of a stretch, but
no, that's a good point, because Joseph is like the first like Christological type character that goes through the full like suffering, descending down into death, and then symbolically death, and then rising up to become like a leader. And he is a son of not just Joseph but also Rachel. So that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, that's good. I think that makes sense.
Joseph is a son of Jacob, and Jesus is the son of a different Joseph, but with the same name.
Yes. Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah. So, checking it out. Dang. Anyways, going forward, then we have when Herod is going to order that all the infants are destroyed so that he can find Jesus and kill him. It's Satan who tells Herod about the birth of Jesus. And then he orders to have John the Baptizer beheaded and to search for Jesus. So Herod isn't told about Jesus's birth by the Magi anymore. He finds out by Satan directly telling him, almost as if he had like a personal relationship with Satan or something. I don't know. John the Baptizer is also killed before he baptizes Jesus.
Yeah. This is
he's also
not super. No, go for it.
Yeah, I was just going to say, he's called John the Baptizer when he's not that much older than Jesus, right? Because Mary and Elizabeth meet, and Elizabeth's son is jumping in her womb about the Mary's son in her womb. So he's known as the Baptizer, and yet he's already being beheaded for some reason. What were you going to say?
Well, I'm going to say, like, at least they're consistent with Herod's character of being someone who's intimidated by babies. So, whereas before he was intimidated by babies, lots of them, now he's intimidated by a baby, John the Baptist, which is appropriate.
Well, why do you think it's appropriate? Because John the Baptist, well, I guess he's born from a priestly family. I guess maybe there would have been like Zechariah's
going. I was just going to go like that. Herod and John the Baptist didn't really get along in the canonical Gospels. And now, John is devil threatening because he's both a baby and he's also, and he's John the Baptist.
Okay, I'm sorry. I thought you were being for real. Okay, yeah, my bad. Yeah, okay. Yeah, double threatening a child and John the Baptizer. He doesn't even have to do anything. So, yeah, another thing that I think that this might be about, I'm not sure, and this depends upon whether or not this Christian author would have read Revelation in this way, but I think this might also be trying to connect the birth narrative a little bit more closely to Revelation, where there's this dragon that tries to kill the mother who's giving birth, and then I think she flees to the wilderness and everything. So I think it might be trying to connect these and show like Satan more directly as being the dragon, and showing that it was Satan behind Herod, possibly. Otherwise, I'm not sure, other than just making it more clear that what Herod is doing is in line with the forces of darkness, which is also possible. But yeah, I don't know what you think of that take.
Yeah, I mean that certainly makes sense per se, but I guess it's not super explicit. Yeah. I would also almost, I don't know. Yeah, it's a really difficult one to like why have this extra added step.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know.
It's hard to say for sure, but I would definitely be cautious about making claims about that. But yeah, anyway, so then this text goes on to say that it just says that Herod died the worst form of death in atonement for slaughtering all the sinless children. So Herod's death not long after slaughtering the innocents is in fact the consequence of his decree to have them killed. And again, we talked about this in an earlier episode about this like contrapasso, the punishment fitting the crime. And so because he destroyed these innocent people, now he suffers the worst form of death. And this day as well, at least I don't know how ancient it is, but in the Christian calendar, there's a day that celebrates, or I guess you wouldn't say celebrate, but there's a day honoring these children that died. That's called the day of I think it's called the Festival of the Innocents. So for all these young children that Herod killed on his way trying to attempt to assassinate Jesus. So that's the backstory. Jesus makes sure that you have the backstory. And now he's jumping forward a little bit. And we're really focusing in on Joseph now. He explains Joseph lived to be 111 years old, staying in total youthful vigor and without any unhealth the whole time. So kind of like the patriarchs who lived older, like Abraham and Isaac and Jacob and Moses and Job, the solid righteous characters. He's living longer. And I guess like the 3 ones is like an image of completeness because there's 3 of them and they're all ones. 111. But yeah, I guess maybe there is a little bit more of that connection to Jacob and the patriarchs and him living such a long lifespan in total health. So then there's this explanation that Jesus obeys Joseph and Mary and does everything that they say without answering them at all, which unlike any of the other infancy gospels that have any basis on Thomas, Jesus is actually like a good child. And to be fair, in the Gospel of Luke, it does seem like this is at least challenging his parents and being like, didn't you know that I had to be at my father's house? Or at least that's how it comes across to me.
Well, it's the opposite of early on in the other infancy gospels where Jesus can read and talk. Now he doesn't talk at all.
Like you're saying, just because there's no mention of him talking
without
yet?
giving a response, he just obeys. I mean, yeah, if he's just going without a response, it's the opposite.
Okay,
and he's not very show-offy either. You know?
Hey, that's a good point. Yeah, I didn't even think about that. I wonder if this might have been even put in here since the infancy gospel of Thomas had such a wide influence to kind of battle against that, to be like, hey, you may have heard of the infancy gospel of Thomas and all this, but just so you know, these traditions aren't true. So it just adds in this line just to make sure that you know.
Yeah, like that was way too spicy. Let's calm down for a bit. Yeah.
Yeah. So little note there. Then it dives into, this is the core, this is the central part, the spicy part of the story. So it's made those explanations, already jumping to the future. And now it's as Joseph is about to die, an angel of the Lord tells him that he's about to die. And then Joseph becomes afraid and he goes to Jerusalem to beg God to send him Michael, his guardian angel, first, and to not let him die by any terrible death, nor for anything to keep his soul from entering paradise, nor his sins being exposed before his judgment, nor demons to come near to attack him, but that he would have a clear path upwards. Yeah. So here everybody has a guardian angel, which you could get that idea from the one passage. I think it's in the Synoptics where Jesus says, I'm pretty sure I remember it specifically being in Mark and Luke, where Jesus talks about there are angels that represent the little ones who see his face, to talk about the little ones before him, where he talks about that if you make a little one stumble, it would be better for you to have a millstone tied around your neck and then you to be thrown in the ocean. Either way, that's a pretty traditional, like still interdenominational traditional belief that there are these guardian angels. And so Joseph gets pretty much the highest angel. I mean, not to brag, Michael. And so he goes, asks for that. And you can already see a glimpse of their theology here where he's asking for to not die by a terrible death, to not have anything keeping his soul from entering paradise, which I guess you could just interpret as, oh, he's saying like, just make it that I'm not like sinful. And so like, I'm just condemned. But as we'll see, there's like this whole journey thing that your soul makes after you die, nor that his sins are exposed before your judgment. So this could be talking about a final judgment we're going to get into this more, nor for demons to come near and attack him, but that he would have a clear path upwards. So the further and further you get into this, it seems like, oh, okay, so he has this whole view of like your soul making a type of journey towards paradise and kind of encountering angels and demons and this judgment like after your death. So that's interesting. Then we have this note, just to make sure you know, that Joseph didn't marry until he was 40. He stayed married to his first wife for 49 years till he was 89, spent another year unmarried, that would make him 90, and then had Mary stay with him 3 years, so he'd be 93, before she gave birth to Jesus, which would mean he lived 18 years. Jesus is 18 in this example, just old enough to, start being a legal adult by our culture. You obviously have these this first set of 40, which represents testing. Then he's married for a whole Jubilee cycle, 49 years. And then he's widowed a year, and then with Mary for 3 years, which is, a divine number. And then 18, I guess 18 is 2 times 3 times 3. If you wanted to parse it like that, or you could just say that that's just the leftover years. But anyways, he has this pretty nice, very theologically significant, well-rounded milestones for his life. And then it goes back to the story. Joseph becomes ill. He's bedridden. He loses his wisdom and skill in trade, and he hates food and drink. And he starts sighing and pronouncing woes over all of his sins. And this really gives the narrative an opportunity to have Joseph condemn all of these sins and give some ethical instruction and talk about the right way to live, because he's giving woes for all his sins.
And he's mimicking fasting, right? In some senses.
Yeah, I guess so. He hates food and drink. Yeah, so I guess there's kind of like a connection to like fasting and death. Like fasting is kind of a giving yourself over to death for a day to like rely on God's life in a symbolic kind of way. So yeah, that's a good point. I didn't think of that. And he's totally like ill and bedridden. Yeah. So then Jesus. Yeah. Sorry. Continue.
What he's doing makes me think of something that a monk would do. Like you go and you renounce a lot of things that are nice. You experience unpleasantness, and then you confess your sins. Like you say, like, oh man, what, like, and so. Anyway,
that's good. Yeah. Huh. I didn't think of that, but it almost gives this kind of monastic background to this story, or at least Joseph's death does resemble that. That's I didn't think of that. That's
perhaps,
good.
yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. There's definitely a lot of, I'm listening to an audiobook on Eastern Orthodoxy right now. Not that I know much, but there's definitely a big emphasis on monasticism. So I could definitely, this is a much earlier text. But I know that there was also a big emphasis on monasticism then. So yeah, that would make a lot of sense. And it makes sense within the logic of the story. Yeah. So Jesus comes to see Joseph on his bed as he's dying, and Joseph prays to him and calls him God and Lord and asks for forgiveness for having doubted that Mary was a virgin when he found out that she had conceived. And that goes back to, I know it's not the Proto-Evangelium of James. I think it was the next Infancy Gospel that we talked about after that, where it was more explicit about those things. The Gospel of Pseudo-Matthew, I want to say. But either way, he's, he apologizes for doubting the virgin birth, which also gives, emphasizes Mary's virginity at the same time. Clearly asserting Jesus's divinity, making sure that it's very orthodox. So then Jesus invites Mary to enter. Jesus invites Mary to enter Joseph and see his soul as it ascends from the body. They see Joseph begin to die, and Jesus puts his hand on his throat and feels his soul leaving through his throat, while Mary feels Joseph's feet go stiff. They then see death and Gehenna come up with their armies, smiling and ready to finish Joseph. Joseph cries, and Jesus prays to the Father to send Michael and Gabriel to be with Joseph until he is brought to the Father.
Whoa.
Yeah. Pretty gnarly. Do you want to explain? Do you know like the Hebrew word for nephesh? Sorry. Do you know the Hebrew word for soul?
Yeah.
Like what part of the body it's connected to?
I don't know what part of the body it's connected to, but I know nefesh means soul, I think, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I guess I kind of gave that away. But Bible Project, even in their like video on the Nefesh, they talk about how it also refers to your soul. So there's kind of like a double entendre even in that psalm where it says, "My soul thirsts for the Lord." So it's like connecting the
Mm.
soul to your throat. Um, and then death. And do you want to explain Gehenna for those who might not know?
Gehenna. Yeah, that's the like hell place, right? So you've got like
Yeah.
Hades. So yeah, so there's Sheol, right? So you got like the ancient Near Eastern cosmology, right? Where like basically the world is somewhat flat. You got the big oh man, what do you call it? The dome that goes over the world.
Firmament.
That's the thing that you see in Genesis 1. The firmament, yeah, you've got that. And then down below in the ground, there's Sheol, right? And that's where the dead people go. So sometimes, when you read like uh, I was just reading Jacob in Genesis earlier this week, and Jacob is talking about not wanting to lose Benjamin. And he's like, "Oh, I don't want to send my soul down to Sheol, right, or something similar to that." So that's Sheol. That's where death is right there. But Gehenna is the one that's actually like death, and I've only like know about it a little bit from like a book, and I think they were kind of saying it's associated with some like kind of like hillside that's pretty like gnarly dark or whatever, and it got its name kind of from that. But yeah, that's kind of what Gehenna is. It's like the actual hell place. Think
Yeah.
Dante's Inferno, just the word was around before Dante was around.
Yeah. Well, so Dante's Inferno technically would be Hades, but it's kind of because it is the temporary place. But I guess there's kind of probably like some conflation because I think there's differences on whether there's arguments as to whether or not that place is a place of punishment for the wicked until they're fully punished in hell in Gehenna. Because you'll see, for example, in Samuel, in First Samuel, at the end of First Samuel, whenever Saul is at Endor and there's this witch who he has call up Samuel from his grave, Samuel says, "Why did you disturb me in my sleep?" So it's almost like this restful place. But then there is also in Jesus's parable in Luke about the rich man and Lazarus, which is describing Hades or Sheol. Hades is the Greek word that the New Testament and other Greek Jews would have used to talk about Sheol. In that place, Jesus, speaking to Jews in their tradition, seems to assume that the evil person is still in fire and asks for the person in Abraham's bosom, which in intertestamental Judaism, this idea became a lot more developed, especially Gehenna as well, but also this idea that everybody went to Sheol, and we'll talk about this a lot, especially as we go to the pilot cycle, but everybody goes to Sheol when you're dead before Jesus. And then once Jesus, in the Apostles' Creed, there's the claim that he descended into hell or Hades or death. It depends on your translation. If it's the word hell, that word is often conflated. It's often conflating Sheol or Hades with Gehenna. Those are two different things, but somewhat related. So in Old Testament thought everybody went down to the grave. You can see this throughout the Psalms. Righteous characters talk about going there. In intertestamental Judaism, there were in 1 Enoch and other apocalyptic texts, you can see that people conceptualize that there was a place for the righteous where they didn't suffer, where they were blessed, and it was pretty much like heaven in the realm of the dead, but not fully realized. And then there might have been punishment for the other people, for the unrighteous. And then whenever Jesus descended into Hades, and especially we'll see in traditions how he brings up the righteous and brings them into paradise. But yeah, that's to be distinguished from Gehenna, which you're right, is geographically a valley just outside of Jerusalem. I think it's on the western side, but I can't remember which side it's on. And you'll see this in Jeremiah 7. This is called, in the Old Testament, it's the valley of Ben Hinnom, the son of Hinnom. And so it got transliterated as, I think it's like Gehinnom, but it's written as Gehenna. And so this is when Jesus is talking about the lake of fire, where the worm doesn't die. He's talking about this Gehenna. And so this is whenever there's the ultimate resurrection and everyone is brought up from the dead. then the unrighteous suffer in Gehenna eternally. This is also, I guess, one of the things that makes this, that conceptually, to help understand why is this a hillside outside of Jerusalem. There's this myth that it used to be like a trash heap where they burnt a bunch of trash, and there was this awful odor that was passed on by some early church fathers. But that's a myth. But in Second Kings, it also talks about a lot of the kings of Jerusalem passing their children through the fire up to their gods, to the pagan gods. And so it's almost like again, contrapasso, just like the idolatry and the passing up of the fire. So their suffering is in fire, and it's outside of Jerusalem, the holy city. It's outside of God's presence. So as much as I can make sense of it, that's Gehenna. And so Gehenna and death both, yeah. So they are both in front of Jesus. So death, which I'm guessing the underlying Greek word is Hades here. So Hades or Sheol and Gehenna are both standing before Joseph, ready to take him. They're like anthropomorphized. They're made into like characters. And you can even see that we're getting kind of deep into this stuff, but you can see that in the New Testament sometimes where, good example, I think it's Hosea. It's most famously quoted by Paul in 1 Corinthians 15, where he says, "Oh, death, where is your sting? Oh, hell, where is your victory?" But it's kind of anthropomorphized in different places to different extents. And then here they're like characters.
Yeah. In Revelation, at the end, Jesus sends death into the fire. Like death gets killed.
Oh, yeah. Yes. Yeah. It's true. He puts death. Yeah. Crazy. So
that one's a little bit more explicit, I think, as like anthropomorphized. But yeah,
you can see different developments and levels of it. Yeah, that's a good example. So anyways, so Jesus, so there's a lot to do. There's a lot to see here. I mean, Jesus invites Mary to enter into Joseph and see his soul ascending from the body. I mean, you can see like all this like crazy stuff. Jesus is praying to the Father to send Michael and Gabriel to be with Jesus, to bring him up to the Father, and pretty much like preventing him from like dying for a moment. This is kind of a crazy scene for a moment. So Michael and Gabriel do come, and they wrap Joseph's body up and protect him from the demons on the way until he goes up to be with the pious, which is kind of crazy. If you think about it, Joseph, who in this apocryphal text is supposed to be like this righteous person, this great person, he does confess like all these sins before he dies, but like, isn't that because he is so righteous that he confesses those? Like, it kind of makes you wonder and think, man, if this dude needed Michael and Gabriel to like fend himself off as he's like going up to paradise, like, bro, what's gonna be of me? So anyways, so Jesus tells Joseph's dead body that death won't have dominion over it, but it will not be broken or change or rot away. And then he blesses those who do good for the poor, widows, orphans, and those in need, as well as those who write down or continue to pass on this story. So again, you can see the strong emphasis on ethical instruction, as well as trying to like validate the story, which ironically would kind of seem as evidence against it, at least for me, because it's like, okay, if Joseph's body isn't rotting away, then where's it at? Anyways, yeah. So Jesus then laments that everyone dies because of Adam's sin, which you can see is a form of original sin. And then the apostles, hearing the story, ask, if everyone dies, why Enoch and Elijah didn't die? And then Jesus explains that they too will die after they return to the world and the Antichrist kills them, along with Sheila and Tabitha. Don't ask me who those are. I don't know. And they must die because God prophesied to Adam that it is humanity's fate. Yeah.
It says Sheila and Tabitha?
Yeah, Sheila. Schila.
And then the other person is Tabitha? Isn't Tabitha the girl who gets like resurrected at one point? I think she is.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, isn't that... Yeah, that's Jesus who resurrects that little girl, right?
Yeah, I don't know if it's Jairus's daughter. It might be someone else, but I think that's who that might be.
Okay. So Tabitha in Acts 9, she is a Christian woman in Joppa, full of good works and full of charity. And then the Apostle Peter prays for her and raises her from the dead. So not Jesus, Peter. And then, a quick chat GPT says that Sheila, says, I think that's a misspelling. And it gives some different ideas that maybe it's Silas or some Jewish priest mentioned in Acts 19, which I'm going to doubt. gonna say it's probably not that person. So yeah, and I was kind of curious. I remember there being some Tabitha in the New Testament, but I just wasn't sure, especially with her being next to Shilla. So I don't know. Whoever Shilla is must have been a great woman, but yeah. Anyways, so Enoch and Elijah are then interpreted as being the two prophets in Revelation who are going to preach in the end times, which is a traditional view, even in Judaism, if I remember correctly. But then it almost explains that verse in Revelation as being, it almost interprets that verse in Revelation as being an explanation for why they need to die. At least like one reason for like they need to die, because God had already prophesied to Adam that it's humanity's fate. And so Jesus explains that God lengthens the life of sinners so that they may repent, and he likewise lengthens the life of the zealous so that others might imitate them. But angry people die quickly.
Hey, can I just real quick, I want to slow down and clarify for anyone who might be listening, because we moved really fast. We jumped to Revelation. We're like, oh, there's two people there. And so yeah. I believe the two people that are probably, if you're curious and you're like, I'm not following two people in Revelation, it's in Revelation chapter 11, right? And anyway, there's two witnesses who kind of call out and they start prophesying. And then I believe everyone gets mad at them and kills them. It says, when they finish their testimony, the beast will come up out of the abyss and will make war on them, conquer them, and kill them. The beast is a creature that comes up. Well, the beast comes up in Revelation 13. Interesting. Anyway, so that's really interesting. The beast appears before he, I'm learning new things all the time. But yeah, and then basically the people rejoice, right? And then they come back to life. In 3.5 days, I'm looking at Revelation 11:11. After 3.5 days, the breath of life from God entered them, and they stood on their feet, and great fear fell on all who saw them. And anyway, so that's who that is. If you're kind of confused when we're talking about two people, and we're talking about Enoch and Elisha in the Old Testament, those are two people who you don't get a death for them, right? Enoch walks with God, and then it says God took him or something like that, and then Elisha is someone who rides up on a chariot with fire. So anyway,
yeah. Or actually, to be more precise, actually in Jewish rabbinic tradition, not in like the pseudepigraphal and other traditions, but in rabbinic tradition, they actually do interpret Enoch as dying. They say, because the Hebrew technically says, and Enoch was no more because God took him. So it just interprets that as he died, but it's just saying that
he was no more as in he's dead.
Yes,
it was
exactly.
Yeah, wow.
Yeah. But so technically the Hebrew is ambiguous, which I didn't know until like I heard that. I was like, oh, I never noticed that. And I don't know about you, but until I started, and I think this was in a Jewish pseudepigrapha that also talked about, or maybe it was a Christian one that was of the Old Testament that mentioned these two prophets being Enoch and Elijah. And there was something written on it that was explaining, oh, this interprets these characters in Revelation as Enoch and Elijah. I guess if it's interpreting the two as in Revelation, then it had to be Christian. But it didn't occur to me that these weren't named characters in Revelation. In my mind, I had just implicitly always assumed that these were Enoch and Elijah. What did you ever like think like, oh, I wonder who these are? Did you always like think? I don't know why I had always thought that, but
yeah, I think I had like her. I remember the names not being mentioned, and then the gap being filled out, and then someone saying, "Oh, that's Elijah and Enoch," and then I was like, well, maybe I have my own theory. Who knows? Maybe it's Bob down the street. I actually legitimately thought it could be anyone, but yeah, I don't know. But yeah, I was. I didn't have specific names. I knew that generally speaking, people thought it was them. If you want to put up another alternative theory, you could say Moses and Elijah, because Moses represents the Torah and Elijah represents the prophets in the specific order of the Bible. But yeah, I don't know.
Well, yeah, and there's also traditions about Moses not dying, despite Deuteronomy explicitly saying he's dead. But yeah, so okay, cool. Yeah, if this is the case for you as well, share who you thought these two prophets were, if you knew about this in the comments, because I'm interested. I don't know where I learned this. It is in the Left Behind series, so you can just see that if you want, like the first, I think the first 20 minutes of not the Nicolas Cage, but the original Left Behind movie, it has these two prophets, so you can just see that as well. And I remember, I think they breathe fire and stuff. Anyways, Yeah. Oh, quick reception history of Revelation in these two prophets. But that's the end. Sorry. That is the end. But one interesting thing that we kind of breezed over, because it is interesting, the whole thing about Sheila, Tabitha, who we don't know, and Enoch and Elijah. Jesus' explanation. So Enoch and Elijah have to die because God prophesied to Adam. So it's set for all humans, which by that logic, also, you think of Genesis 6, where God says, like, man's days will be 120 years because of his sin. A lot of people interpret that as being, therefore the lifespan of man was made 120 years. You even see that in the pseudepigraphine jubilees, but then you have some exceptions to that case, like, for example, Moses. I want to say Job, I can't remember, he either like pushes it and gets close. Yeah, I can't remember if those pass it actually, but Joseph, Jacob, Abraham, I know there's at least a couple characters that get close, if not pushing it after that. So that is probably the most traditional interpretation, although like the interpretation that I've heard that's pretty good is that this is actually saying that God's giving 120 years until he sends the flood, because it's kind of ambiguous. But anyways, this gives a very literal reading of, this is God's prophecy to Adam, therefore this is going, everybody's dying, doesn't matter, which is interesting. And then Jesus gives this explanation that God lengthens the life of sinners so that they might repent, and he lengthens the life of the zealous so that others might imitate them, which you could understand. That's kind of intuitive. But then that kind of, I guess that means that if you don't do good, or if you're not righteous or a sinner, you're just going to die. It doesn't say that, but it says angry people die quickly, which, angry people are sinners. But I guess it's because anger is like connected with hatred and unforgiveness and like more murder and stuff. And so you're doing evil to people actively, I guess. I don't know. Yeah.
So
I guess there's just a lower view of anger.
I know that like once people get into a certain decade in their life, they start thinking about, what can I do to make this life last longer? Some people, not everyone. And so they start hitting the gym and stuff like that. And based on this, it would be wise for you, it would behoove you to be angry less and opt to either become zealous or either become zealous.
Yikes.
Or become unrighteous. I'm just kidding.
Yeah.
It would be better for you to hunger and thirst for righteousness, because then you would be satisfied.
Yeah. Word. So even though that doesn't necessarily, actually the one promise in the covenant or the first promise that comes with the promise of everlasting, or not everlasting, long life on the earth, is honoring your father and mother. So Ephesians 6.
So honor your father and mother.
Well, that's the one that notes that that's the first commandment, with the promise that you will live a long life on the earth. The commandment is from the 10 Commandments. So yeah, which is a general promise. But yeah, that's interesting. I bet it's psychological.
It's long life in the land.
Yeah.
Long life in the land.
I guess
the context, because they're about to go into the promised land. It's an Exodus.
Okay.
Anyway,
I think that's the translation.
Really matter.
This is tangential. Yeah, but yeah, I think it's the translation that I read it from, because that word can be translated earth or land. So I guess I think that translation, I don't know how they translated Exodus 20.
Is it Aretz? Maybe. I don't know. I think that it's the same one where it says that like water covered all of it. Might be. I can double check. Man, I need another time. But I think if it's Aretz, it's like that word is translated as land or world. So that's like why some people say like, oh, water covered all of the world in Genesis when Noah's Ark, when it also means like it just hit all the land. Anyway, this is tangential.
Yeah.
But
no, I bet you're probably right. I think that's just the translation, because translations often, and the Greek word for that as well, gi, can be translated, or gay, I think it's pronounced, can be translated as land or earth in translations. In my opinion, it's better to just have a consistent translation and just use land, because they didn't think of the world as a globe, and that's typically how the word earth, the connotation that it has. But that's just the translation that I had in my mind. But that's actually revealing, because I hadn't thought of that, and that makes a lot of sense, that they live a long life in the land. Yeah. I guess these interpreters are imposing on Paul the interpretation that Paul is now universalizing that, or reinterpreting that commandment as talking about long life in the world, now that he's giving this injunction to the church rather than Israel.
Yeah.
I don't know. Either way,
if you're interested, if you're listening and you're not following what we're talking about Exodus chapter 20. There's 10 commandments. You've probably heard of them. Some people are trying to put them in all the schools. And so one of them is for children to obey.
Yeah.
As we record this, at the time of this recording, if you're listening 200 years, I don't know how well this is going to age, but and also Paul quotes that in Ephesians chapter 6, right at the beginning of Ephesians chapter 6. He says, "Hey, children, obey your parents. Children, obey your father and mother." This is the first
obey your
commandment
parents in the Lord, for this is right.
For this is right, yeah. On your father and mother. It's the first commandment with the promise. So anyway, so Paul's quoting the Exodus.
Yeah. Good stuff. Yeah, and I was just going to add, I'm pretty sure, I mean, this sounds pretty basic, like it makes intuitive sense, but I think, is it physiologically speaking, it makes sense that, like, you know, angry people live shorter lives, you know, anger kind of takes energy away and probably, like, I don't know, I'm sure emotions and, you know, I study like Second Temple Judaism and extra biblical texts, so, you know, don't be quoting me to your doctor, but it would make sense if that was the case, all I'm saying.
Michael is not your healthcare professional. So, however, perhaps some wisdom could be said towards those who are angry, get into fights, and fights are more lethal than non-fights most of the time.
True.
So, you know, maybe that's a way of looking at it.
Yeah. And if you do end up, you know, unfortunately, you're not in such great health, but you're not angry, you can share this with your healthcare provider anyways, even though I'm not a healthcare authority.
Ask your healthcare provider if being less angry is right for you.
Yeah, right. Oh, dude, it's great. So, yeah, anyways, as for this text, concluding for the orthodoxy index, yeah, I think I'm going to give this I'll give this text a 9 because it is very insistent on a lot of Orthodox teaching. It's like the hypostatic union, the Trinity. I mean, it opens up with a very clear explanation of the Trinity. I do think, and this does have to do with my tradition of Christianity as a Protestant, I don't think, well, I guess there's nothing to say that I can't believe that saints pray for us, whether or not, like, I don't believe we should pray to saints, but I don't believe, I guess I believe saints are probably praying for us. So I guess I don't believe one way or another about that. The emphasis on Mary being a perpetual virgin, I'm a little bit shy of that. But then also, you know, although it's technically in capital O Orthodox, Eastern Orthodox, the whole view of death and stuff, I think it's probably, in a sense, it makes more sense than the very rigid scientific explanation of purgatory to me. I don't think it's biblical, but I don't know. I would say for the most part, this is a very Orthodox text. And on the big things, it's definitely emphasizing this is Orthodox. And I think it should get extra points towards its orthodoxy for actively combating heresy from other texts and having Jesus as an obedient child. And yeah, so I just think it's more orthodoxically literate.
You actually made a case that actually moved this up on my view of the orthodoxy index. So
let's go.
And you said 9, or are you going to add points on top of the 9? Like are you trying to go up to like 11 or something? Okay, then
No, I was going to, in my mind, I would have given it something smaller, but the reason I'm giving it 9 is maybe those other points maybe have made it like an 8, but now so.
The problem that I'm going to hold here is with the incongruencies with the Bible. What I mean by that is if John the Baptist is dying at age 2, he's not making it to getting his like front teeth, right? If that's happening, that presents a lot of problems for the narrative of the Gospels. And for that reason, I have a hard time giving it above a 7. And so, you know, like that's probably where I'm going to land. So it probably would have been worse. It could have been worse. And it's like, you know, you wrestle with that question, like good and bad. Is that better than being a little bit lukewarm? Anyway, I don't know.
Yeah.
But anyway, the listeners can go ahead and let us know in the comments or what their orthodoxy index is, if that merits, you know, losing some points or gaining some. Am I too harsh? Am I too angry?
Please Tell us what. Yeah, hopefully you're not too angry because we got quite a few episodes to record. There are other things more than the Babylonian, but hopefully
I want to be here next
you make
week.
it to the end of the season. Yikes! Yeah, yeah. So in the end, as we learned from Joseph, don't be angry, and yeah, there's a whole journey. According to this text, there's a journey for your soul even after life. Not that we believe that, but there is a journey of learning, and we hope to be on that journey with you to help and lead and guide you in the Babylonian. So come back next week ready to Bible on.